back in September, right up there outside the Sunday school room, I put a box, a Stump the Priest box, so that you guys could ask me questions about all the things you want to know. So I went through that box, and I took a look through, and I found a lot of great questions, and I found one really good one that I want to talk about today, because someone asked, how did they make the Bible? And this is a great question, because if I'm going to tell you that this book is important, we might want to know a little bit about it and a little bit about where it comes from. And I'm going to admit to you, just at the beginning, it can get a little bit complicated. So the first thing we need to know is that who the Bible is written to and who it's written about are not the same thing. Who do you think the audience for the Bible is? Who do you think it's written to? Say it again. Us, that's right. It's written to you. It's written to the worshiping community, to the church. You're the audience. And we know that because all the stories are told in the past, right? All the stories are told in the past tense. If we're telling you, if you're reading a story about St. Paul, or about Abraham, or about the prophet and King David, all of it's told in the past. So we know that the community that's receiving the book already exists. They're already worshiping, they're already praying, and they're there to receive it. The next thing that we need to know is that stories can be told for a very, very long time before they ever get written down. And we don't know how long some of these stories were told before they were written down. And we don't really know exactly when the very first draft of the very first story was written down for the first time. But we do know more or less when that process of beginning to write down these stories started and about how long it lasted. So how many years before Christ do you think it was when they started to write these things down? How many years before Christ do you think it was when they started to write the first stories in here down? Take a guess. How many years? 5 years? Okay, that's a guess. That's a guess. What do you think? You're going with 5. Okay. 1,000. Okay. What do you think? Well, all right. So we've got 5. We've got 100. We've got 1,000. Last guess. How many? 6. 5, 6, 100, or 1,000. Well, it could have been as early as 1,400 years before the birth of Christ. And it took about another 800 years to finish. So you have 800 years of people writing and contributing. That's a lot of influences. That's a lot of people. And as a matter of fact, what you have here is not really one book. It's actually a collection of a lot of different types of books and a lot of different types of writing. Some of it are stories with lessons. Some of it is history. Some of it's advice. And guess what? There's even a book in here that is nothing but songs and poetry. So after we've had so many people, prophets and kings and all of these people contributing to the writing of the Bible, we get to something very, very interesting and very, very beautiful. Nearly all of the major characters in this book have serious mistakes, every last one of them. Now let me ask you something. I want to see a show of hands, okay? If you had a really bad mistake, if you really messed up, do you think your best friend would keep it a secret, or do you think that they'd tell everybody? Raise your hand if you think that your best friend would keep it a secret. All right? Raise your hand if you think your best friend would go and tell everyone. Okay. Well, let me tell you, in the Bible, we keep all of those mistakes right in there. And we all know about them, and it's for a very, very good reason. All of those mistakes that all of these great figures make are in there so that we can look and we can say, as we read it, you know, if God can still make a prophet or still make a saint out of this person, even with their enormous mistakes, He can do anything with us. He can do anything with me. Our mistakes are not the last word. They're not the final word. God doesn't give up on us. And He continuously has another way for us to come home, another way for us to get around it. Your mistakes are not the end of the story. And so we get a nice clear picture of all of these people messing up and then getting right back up and continuing on and becoming prophets and saints and all of the rest. So we have this very long process. 1,400 years before Jesus, 800 years of writing, a couple more centuries of waiting. And then how many years do you think? And that's just for the first half. Just for the Old Testament. Just for the first half. So what about the second half? How many years do you think it took after the death and resurrection of Jesus for the second half to finish being written? What do you think? 2,000. What do you think? 1,000. Well, actually, it's a lot shorter. The second half got done in just 77 years. Big difference. There you go. That's one clue. The New Testament is shorter than the Old Testament. Very good, my friend. Right here. Excellent. So if we've got this long period, we have 800 years of writing, followed by another 77 years of writing, over a couple of thousand years, then the question becomes, these are probably not the only things people are writing. They're probably writing a lot of other things. In fact, we know that they were writing a lot of other things. And we know that not all of those things are in here. So the real question is, how do we pick these books out, and why put these in here and not some of the other stuff? And I want to go ahead and, I want to show you. I want to tell you a little bit about how we end up deciding that. So I want someone to read this for me. Sweetie, can you read that? Can you read that? Okay, maybe, right? Maybe. Because you have to know the author. And if you know the author and you know the source, you know that it makes sense. If you know the author is your local Orthodox priest, then it makes sense to read that. God is now here. But it's all thrown together. So if you knew the author was someone who maybe didn't believe in a God, it would make sense to read that God is nowhere. You have to know the author. You have to know the source. And that's why God gives us first and foremost prayer and worship and services so that we get used to him. We know what he sounds like. We become acquainted with him. And so that we can start to recognize him when we see him and when we come across him. And so through that long period, as people were starting to write things down, they started to they started to get the sense that that God that they were familiar with, that they knew what it sounded like, that they could hear him in this text, and they could see him here. And those texts, those writings, started to get put aside and started to get collected. Kind of the same way you can hear something I'd say, and you say, that sounds like something that Father Michael would say. Or you can hear someone say, that sounds like something that my mom would say. But that sounds exactly like something my dad would say. When we're familiar with someone, we know what they sound like. And so when we're setting these books aside, we're looking for two things. One, being able to confirm that the person they claim really wrote it. And two, that we could hear sort of the voice of that God that we recognize from all of our prayer, from all of our worship, and from all of our time together with him. And something that meant that some books that were very, very popular didn't make it in. Like the Proto-Evangelium of James, very popular, didn't make it in. It meant some books that were not popular at all did make it, like the book of Revelation. But the church was very wise about what it did with these books that didn't make it in. Because they didn't just get thrown away. We looked at them and we said, there might be something here. So a lot of our major church feasts, like the Nativity of the Theotokos, September 8th, the entrance of the Theotokos into the temple, November 21st, the names Joachim and Anna that are mentioned every service in the dismissal, all that comes from the Proto-Evangelium of James. It didn't make it into Scripture. But we looked and we said, even though the whole book might not be inspired, there's still some very good and very useful things here. And so we kept them. So that's kind of how it happened. It was a long process. God got people together. He gave them prayer and worship so that they would be able to recognize him and recognize his voice and what he sounded like and what he seemed like. And then throughout the history of our community, from ancient times until now, the things that were written down that had that voice, that inspired voice that we could recognize, got collected into a volume that we call the Bible. There wasn't one big meeting where we went from zero Bible to the whole Bible in one day. So that's another reason why it's so important for you to come here and you to do your liturgy, for you to pray, for you to worship, for you to spend time with God, so that you can recognize that voice. So that when you come across His voice, and you come across the things that sound like God, that voice will be familiar to you. Not the voice of a stranger, but just as familiar as the voice of your own mothers and fathers. Do we understand? Clear? All right. Wonderful. Outstanding. God bless you all and keep you wonderful this year. Please go back to your family and help us pray the rest of the liturgy. God bless you.